Welcome to the American Dream in the Eyes of Immigrants podcast. I am your host, Heidy De La Cruz, and I am on the mission to change the narrative of immigration, one immigrant story at a time. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the American Dream in the Eyes of Immigrants podcast. I am your host, Heidy De La Cruz. And today I have Miss Veronica with us, and she is going to be talking about her journey growing up with immigrant parents and her journey also becoming an immigration attorney. Thank you so much, Veronica, for taking time of your busy day to share your journey and be here with me and my audience. How are you?
I'm doing so good. How about you?
I
Busy?
am. Yeah, yes, I bet. Today has actually been a busy day for me as well. As I told you before we started recording, I actually had an in-person interview to do, and then I was actually on a summit, and then now I'm doing your thing. But thank you again so much for taking time of your busy day. And so, if you can introduce yourself to the audience, who you are, what you do, and then we can get started on your upbringing.
Sure. My name is Veronica Cardenas. I'm an immigration attorney. I used to work as a prosecutor for the Department of Homeland Security. And in 2023, I resigned because I saw a system that did not understand the non citizens that were coming before it, and the non citizens did not understand the system. And so when I resigned, it was to create a more educational platform for people who are going through the process, their family members, to understand the nuances of immigration law because it is so complex.
It is, it is. So I definitely want to get into that a little bit later. So, you were born here in the United States, and you had mentioned to me prior to us recording, that you had parents from Colombia and Peru. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so my mother left Colombia when she was around 20, was in the early 1980s, and she came through the southern border. She met my father in New Jersey, who was a lawful permanent resident at that time, and they got married, and so my father passed on status to her. When my mom left Colombia, she left behind twins, my brothers. They were 3 months at the time, and I
Wow.
know for her that was a very difficult, situation because I'd hear it all the time now in my work, like, moms make promises to their children, right? Like, "This is temporary, it's always meant to be temporary," but you never know in reality if that's gonna be temporary.
Yeah.
And so, when I was 8 months, because my father at that point, petitioned for my mom, he adopted my brothers, and so the first time I went to Colombia, I was 8 months to pick up my
Wa-
brothers. And
Wow.
so yeah, and so it was beautiful in the sense that we grew up, everyone had a different color passport, but those are things that you never really notice as a child when you're traveling, and to me, like, it is my family, like, my brothers are my brothers, we were just everyone just had a different status.
Yeah. And so you grew up in New Jersey.
Grew up in New Jersey. Mhm.
All right. In a diverse neighborhood or not really?
No. Um,
No?
no, it was not diverse, it was mainly Italians, Italian American, so there were very few Latinos.
Okay.
Very few, like, African Americans, so it was a very difficult, environment to say that, when you grow up speaking another language, eating different foods, listening to
Yeah.
different music, there's always that assimilation that you expect, like, other people will like me if I'm like them. That's
Yeah.
something I think you grow out of, and I grew out of over time,
Mhm.
but when you're young, you just wanna fit in, so it was
Yeah.
difficult.
As best as you can, yeah. And so I when I interview people that have 2 different cultures, I love to know if, like, one kinda dominated the other. So did you guys was it, like, equal, or did, like, the Colombian, culture dominate the Peruvian? Tell us about that
I would say it's even, but
even.
in different ways. So my mom's
Oh,
Colombian, and when my mom came here, her mother never wanted to leave Colombia. And so my father, who's Peruvian, his whole family came here. So he didn't have family members left in Peru. So my grandmother on my father's side was the one that like taught my mom how to cook. So Peruvian food dominated our kitchen. Um, but but always like Colombian breakfast for soccer, so like you incorporate
Yeah.
different things like for soccer because we're big soccer fans. Like it would be Colombia and Peru, but mostly Colombia.
Yeah. Oh, okay,
Rooting for,
Yeah.
and so I think it's pretty even in that sense, but um I would say no Colombia more because my grandmother lived there, and so
Mm.
every summer we would go to Colombia to spend with her,
Yeah.
and it was nice.
So tell us about that, because you mentioned the first time you went to Colombia was 8 months, obviously, you don't remember. So tell us about those summers spending in Colombia.
It was the best thing that any parent can do for their children is to expose them to different cultures because here you're like, "What new sneaker am I gonna get?" Like, you're always thinking about material things, and then when I traveled to Colombia, the biggest thing for me was, wow, people are so happy. I remember once I went to una finca that my grandfather owned, and children were running up and down the hills with rocks, and my feet were hurting with shoes,
Mhm,
and they had no
mhm.
shoes, and I was like, "How are they doing that?" And they were laughing and, like, having such a good time, and you realize that happiness is not from the outside forces, it's really with you make with what you have, and oftentimes the less you have, the happier you are because you have less to lose, and so I learned that lesson from an early age, and so when I went to Colombia, I loved being there.
I love that. I love that experience for you because I remember visiting the Dominican Republic when I was younger. My daughter goes there every summer, so it's just like you just get exposed and to different, like you said, different cultures and just a different way of living. Like
Right,
it does seem like people are, happier with less, and things like that. And yes, like visiting is much different than
right.
living there. But yeah, I definitely understand where you're coming from with that. And so you visited Peru, you said once, right? So how was that?
Right. So because my entire family on my father's side traveled to the US around the same time, like in the 70s, 80s, he never had a reason to go back, and
Mm.
there were 4 of us, and so it's
Yeah.
expensive to travel too when growing up, so the first time my father went back, like, we all went together, it was probably, like, 6 years ago, and we went to his town where he grew up, and we saw the church and his school, and it was nice to be there with my dad. We went to the old house where he was actually born in because he was delivered in his house, and it was nice to go through that memory with my
Mm.
father and to know that these are our roots because, um, you know, I'm just a branch of that root, and that still
Yeah.
lives in me, and even though it's not something that I went to every summer, it's something that I believe lives in me.
Mhm.
And so it was nice to be there and to be in that environment.
Yeah, and in Peru, their primary language is Spanish, correct?
Yeah.
But I'm assuming it's a little bit different than the Colombian Spanish.
Yes, like some of the
Yeah.
words are different. Yeah.
Yeah. So growing up, did you speak predominantly like Colombian Spanish or like a mix?
I think a mix
Okay.
because I'll use words that like my grandmother on my Peruvian side would use.
Yeah.
But then I use words that my mom uses for Colombia. So it's like a mix. And then my
A mix.
accent because my parents always spoke to me in Spanish.
Mhm.
But I always responded in English because I was more
Oh,
comfortable. So my
yeah.
accent, I remember once I went to Colombia and you speak Spanish and this person was like, "I actually thought you were a little drunk when you were speaking to me because your Spanish was so, like, slow." And I was like, "No, that's just how I speak Spanish." So
Oh my
it's not
god.
like I have the Colombian accent.
Yeah,
Um,
oh my goodness. Yeah, when I go to Dominican Republic, they always like, I'm gringa, like, I'm not Dominican to them, like, "Oh, you're from the US, so you're gringa," and I will always get compliments on my Spanish, like, "Oh, you speak well for being a gringa," and I'm just like, "Oh my gosh," like, my parents spoke to me in Spanish, like, that's my first language, but, yeah, I was wondering about that because I know this Spanish is Spanish, but there's is different, right, from, Cuba, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, and then obviously Venezuela and all, like, there's certain words that are different, so
yeah, and I feel like people have that misconception, like, to be Latina, you have to speak
mhm.
perfect Spanish, and I've grown up with that my whole life, like, you're not really Latina, and I feel like we have to change that perspective because there's no one way to be Latina. We're all different. We all
Yes.
have different paths, but in our hearts of hearts, right, that is who we are. And so,
Yeah.
being comfortable with that, like my Spanish is not the best, but I will still try. A lot of my clientele speak Spanish
Yeah.
and I serve my community. And so it will be broken, but they understand the message. And at the
Mhm.
end of the day, that's what's important.
Yeah, that is so true. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I have heard that a lot lately, like women feeling that they weren't Latina enough because of the whole like, oh, you need to speak Spanish, or that there's a certain way to be Latina, and it's like, no, there isn't. And yeah, so thank you so much for sharing that. That is so true. And so I want to get into your journey through law school. When did you know that you wanted to be an attorney? Yeah, let's start there. When did you know that you wanted to be an attorney?
So I didn't know until maybe like my fourth year of college when I was about to graduate. And I thought I was going to be a teacher. I love teaching. I wanted to be an English teacher. And then I wasn't ready to graduate. So I'm like, what else can I do to
Yeah.
extend my time in school? And I figured law school sounded cool. I saw other people doing it. It was one of those things that I just tried for it. I went for it and I did get accepted. And
Ah.
then once I got accepted, that's when I was like, oh, wow, this is actually a lot of work. But in that, I feel like I found who I was meant to be.
Mm.
Like law school was not easy. I almost failed my first semester. And when you have to decide, like, is this the right path for me or should I quit now? And at that moment, when I was like, no, this is the path for me. I just have to change my approach. And
Yeah.
after that, I was fully committed. Like this is gonna happen for me.
And when did you choose? Because I know when you go to law school, you learn different types of law. So it's not just like, oh, I'm going to law school to be an immigration attorney. So when did you make that decision to be?
Right.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think immigration law chose me
Mm.
because I was sitting in a class where I had gone to high school with someone, and he came up to me and he's like, "Oh, Homeland Security is looking for an intern. Are you interested?" And there was my second year of law school. I didn't have something concrete. It was like going into the summer, and I said, "Yeah, here's my resume." And I got a call back, and I started working there my second summer. And then after the summer, they asked me if I could stay on for the year.
Mm.
Like, so my 3rd year, I worked there. And then after that, they had started an honors program. This was in 2010 because Homeland Security was still fairly new after 9/11. The Department of Justice, which was where it was housed, they
Mhm.
separated. So Department of Justice continued with their honors program. Homeland Security didn't have one yet. So
Mm.
the year that I graduated was the year that they started it. So I applied and I got accepted, and then I just like, it was just a natural progression for me.
Oh my goodness. Okay. And so got into immigration. So I know you said you just made a shift. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so I've been practicing since 2010, and under Trump 1, policies became very difficult to enforce. And, you know, working as a prosecutor, you hear a lot of things on the news. It's not
Mm.
like there's briefings and they're telling you what's going on at the border. And at that time, it was like children being put in cages. One girl in particular was 8 years old and she died at the border. And when I looked and started researching why, she had a bacterial infection, and if CBP knew what to look for, she wouldn't have died.
Mhm.
And when I heard that story, having children myself who were just my son at the time was 5, and it just made me stop to think, like, this organization is so divorced about who humans are, right? Who we are.
Mm.
We can have immigration laws, but we can still treat each other with dignity and respect just because we're human, right? That's at least the
100.
very least that we could do. And
Mm.
so when those things started happening, I realized that number one, there's nothing I can do from the inside to help people. Like I can't do that. Um, and the system is not working. So I couldn't be part of that system anymore. So I it took me a little while to resign to figure out where I was gonna go because at the time I was looking for another job, but
Mhm,
people don't wanna hire someone from ICE because,
mhm,
they're like, "You're a bad person." Like, there's a lot of things that are charged with that title. And
yeah,
so after I couldn't find another job, I for me, it was like, enough is enough. I'm gonna take my chances and figure out what's next for me, but it's not here. So I resigned, and then that's when I created my own law firm, and then my passion project was just humanigration, is mentoring new lawyers that are coming into the removal defense. Especially now, we see so many people getting arrested,
mhm.
at immigration courts, at their naturalization interviews, going to interviews, and so that's really where my heart is, and then educating people, non-citizens who are going through the process because it's not that they're it's not that they don't want to understand, it's that there's no resources to explain to them how to understand the system.
Oh my god, yeah, it's so complex. So, oh my gosh, there's just so much and so much misconception out there, misinformation that is out there. So I don't think I've interviewed an attorney who's worked with the Homeland Security. So can you tell us a little bit about the work before you transitioned?
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of court hearings, we
Mhm.
represent the quote unquote American people,
Mhm.
but it's not really the American people that we represent because if
Mhm.
you look at our values across the US, they're so diverse.
Mm.
Essentially, who we represent is the president because he's the one that's making all these policies, and so a
Oh my
lot of
gosh, okay.
immigration is driven by policy.
Mhm.
Like, what we see now, all of these arrests that are happening, those are policy changes, that's
Yeah.
not written in the law, and trial attorneys have to defend that, and
Mm.
and
Mm.
so that was that was what I did. I went to court and I defended the policies and the laws as, the administration believed it should be, and when I first started, it was under the Obama administration in New York,
Okay.
and then it was Trump and, when he was elected, and then I stayed for a little bit of the Biden administration, but by that point, the laws had changed, the policy had changed so much,
Yeah.
and it was so different than when I first started in 2010.
Yeah. And so now the arguments that I'm hearing a lot is the Obama administration, deported, X millions of people and things like that. So from your perspective, you were defending Obama's, policies at that time too. So can you tell us like at least like one of the biggest differences between the
Right.
deportations that were happening under Obama versus what's happening now?
Yeah, so under Obama, Obama had a he prioritized cases. And I think that's why there's a balance there because if you remember, he was, felons, not families, criminals, not children. And he was very focused on people who had been living in the US for a very long time, who were contributing and paying their taxes, who had children here. Those cases had discretion. So at the time, they were not being detained. If they A lot of them were being granted asylum and other types of relief. At that time, people on the non-detained docket in New York, where I was working at, the grant rate, the approval rate
Mhm.
was as high as like 78%. So the
Mm.
chances of you getting status were great. But the thing with Obama too was for the detention and secured communities was a big project of his where he started this law enforcement, you know, state police cooperating with ICE. So if you get arrested for DWI, if you get arrested for even low level crimes, you're now being transferred over to ICE. And then once you're in ICE detention, it makes it very difficult to qualify for relief.
Mm.
So that is where that started. So, yes, he deported a lot of people because a lot of people came in through that program, a lot of people were detained, and
Mhm.
so it made it easier because once they're in your custody, you could just put people on an airplane and deport them.
Yeah.
But what I saw then with the shift with the Trump administration and things never really went back to the uh, Obama days was now everyone who is a target, who's a priority now extends to everyone. So where we
Mm,
weren't seeing children, being judged so harshly, now we're seeing that. Where we
yeah.
weren't seeing people who had been in the US for 10 years, we're now seeing that. And even with DACA was extended under Obama. He tried to do that, and he tried to protect their parents too, and that was challenged.
Mhm.
And so now we're seeing, like, lawful pathways that did exist at one time, this administration is trying to roll those back.
Roll those back, yeah. Thank you so much for explaining that, especially from the work that you did. You were there on the inside, and again, there's so much misconception and things like that. And then that's usually the counter argument that people like to make. Well, Obama, did deported X amount of people, and no one, batted an eye. And it's like, no, we know what happened. Like we know the numbers, but it just not knowing like what actually happened. So thank you for sharing that. And so now you stated that you're more focused on education, educating, new attorneys and things like that. So, tell us about your practice, how you oh my gosh, how you educate and what your goal is with your practice now.
Yeah, so my goal now is number 1 to have a community because immigration law is very tough on the spirit, on your mental health. It's
Yes.
so complicated, and so you have to have community. So when I was at Homeland Security, one of the things that was great about it is the training. We learn, like, trial attorneys learn so much because there's no billable hours. So we're always learning. We have mentors there who teach us. Where we have a question, we just go to the office right next door, knock on that, say, "Hey, what do you think about this case?" And that really helps with the success in a case. And so that's what I wanted to create with Humanigration, having a space where when we have questions, we ask each other. We can each tell each other what we're seeing because there's a lot of mentees and we're spread out all over the US. And so what someone's seeing in Florida and California and New York, right? We're sharing that information. And to as things are coming out, as new cases, new policies coming out, having a place where we can talk about that. So that is my goal for human integration, and it has been evolving. And then for people who are in the system, they may think that all they need is a lawyer and they're fine, but that's not how I see things. The person, the non-citizen, whoever's going into court, that's their case. They're the ones that ultimately have that fate, if it's approved or if it's not, and
Yeah.
they need to be in the driver's seat of their case. While they have a lawyer, they should have a lawyer. It's different when you go into a meeting understanding
Mhm.
a little bit about the law and saying, "This is what this is how I see my case. Let's talk about it." Um, and so that was mainly my goal, to put power back to non-citizens so that they can feel more in control about their immigration proceedings.
Yeah. And where are you located now?
I'm in New Jersey, so I'm like
Okay.
10 miles out of New York. I still
Oh,
practice in New York and New Jersey.
in New Jersey. And does your practice, do you guys do like webinars or anything like that to like educate the public?
We do. So we have a live removal defense course. We do that. It runs 3 months. We have webinars. They're free on YouTube, and I've also partnered with different organizations. The one that I just did was with Casa de Don Pedro, where we did videos in English and Spanish just to educate our community members.
Okay. And then we also we connected through a webinar that you, Ingrid, and I can't remember the other lady's name. What was that organization?
Oh, I will. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
It's
connected
called
through.
I Will?
Mhm.
Okay, perfect, yeah, because I saw Ingrid got tagged, and so then that's why I signed up, and then that's where we connected. Okay, perfect, so that's another one. I will definitely include your links, in the show notes and show description, so
Yeah.
people who want to be more educated or maybe, sign up for a webinar or the course and things like that can definitely do that. And I would love to end this conversation. Thank you again so much for your time, for sharing your own journey, and also for the work that you are doing with education, because I really feel like that is the biggest thing right now. It's just like telling people like how the process is and educating and going, back to fundamentals. So the last question that I'd like to end the conversation with is, what does the American dream mean to you?
That's such a great question. And for me, the American dream is all about building bridges,
Mm,
right? As people of color, Latinos, we need to first build that bridge and then extend the hand back because in order for everyone to see themselves in positions that they want to be in, to achieve what it is in their hearts to achieve, we have to do that in community. Nobody does this alone. And so the American dream for me is paving my way to then extend a hand and bring other people along the ride because you got to pay it forward. And so many people did that for me for where I'm standing today. And so that's what the American dream is.
I love that. The American dream is building bridges. I absolutely love that. We are so much stronger in a community than what we are by ourselves. So thank you so much, Veronica, for that, for your time. And any last words that you want to leave with the audience?
I think that whatever dream you have in your heart, it's your responsibility to water that seed and
Mm,
to take steps to make that a reality because when I look at all the things that I've done so far, I feel like if I never would have taken that first step, I would have deprived myself of so much happiness.
mm.
And so nothing is impossible. It's just believing in yourself and taking that first step.
That is so true. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Mami Podcast.